And people talk about losing your mind. I think I was losing my mind. The pain was driving me out of my mind. And but in so doing, it was actually stimulating my mind to kind of question the constructs which create our reality. And the one which really I became fixated on was time. And the moment I asked that question, I can remember I was sitting on the sofa and I just felt this explosion and implosion in my head. It was like a literally, people talk about blowing my mind. My mind was literally blown. It massively, my sense was of massive expansion and then massive contraction.
Like a
And
sort
then
of sonic boom type of
like a
thing.
sonic boom. Yeah, like a,
Mm.
yeah. And
Like a,
yeah.
mm.
And then I was just sitting on the sofa, just laughing my head off. And I think that a lot of this is about trying to say, okay, here we are in our normal reality. I'm just telling you about experiences that I've had, which, inhabit a wider reality, and that is not, that construct there, that limitation there is not a true limitation. It's a,
Absolutely.
it's a belief.
I'm a complete lay person. My name's Izzy, and Freya and I have been friends for over a decade. And over those years, I have heard this woman speak of the most extraordinary things, some of which goes completely over my head, if I'm honest. But I have learned so much, and my life has changed in very many ways as a result of knowing Freya. And it's time that this story came out so that it helps more people, not just me and a few people that Freya knows, but actually it's a message for the future of this planet, to be fair. Is that fair, Freya?
If you say it is. Yeah, I mean, yeah,
Hopefully.
that's the reason that we decided to do these conversations,
Yeah.
because this is it is a very big story. It's a very big journey. It's not my story alone. I mean, I always talk about the fact that, I think that what I've gone through and still am going through and still experiencing now is really a fractal. It's a kind of human-sized version of what the whole of reality and the whole of consciousness and the whole of humanity is going to go through. So, that's really the reason for telling it, is, because I am a very, I wouldn't say reclusive, but I'm certainly a very separate person. I live
Yes.
in a very, as you know, very remote area of Ireland. I used to live in a very remote area of Wales. I keep myself to myself, really. I do work with people,
Absolutely.
but it's certainly not in order to become, an influencer or a
Not at all.
YouTuber or anything like that. The purpose of this is because it's genuinely more and more coming into alignment with
Yeah.
the experience that many, many people are having. And I had always said, even though I've been writing the story, I did always say that there would come a time when it was right to share my life journey,
Absolutely.
simply as a fractal, really, because
Yeah.
it would give some people who may be struggling with their experience or trying to understand their experience, not that I understand it fully myself, more of a context, because it's always a lot easier to experience the extraordinary when someone else has already had an extraordinary experience that you know about. It somehow normalizes it and makes it less concerning, because we do have, in the West particularly now, in kind of what we call the advanced Western civilization, we do have a very, very narrow delineation of mental wellness and mental health and reality. It's much, much more contained and confined than it would be in, say, for example, if I lived in Ireland, here in Ireland 100 years ago, the things that we would accept as true, much more mystical levels of reality, the fairies, the other folk, the mythological beings that people would say that they'd encountered and be quite happy to say that they'd experienced,
Yeah.
different levels of reality. That has all been swept away by modern life, by this constraint and constriction on our experience, and a kind of moving into purely rational, physical, left-brained, logical, reasoned experience being allowed, and anything which falls outside of that experience can be considered worthy of concern, if not medicalization.
Yes.
And it's
Yeah.
true. I think I've worked with people over the years who have had their lives completely curtailed and confined by medication because of one or two experiences they had in their younger years that actually didn't bother them at all, but it bothered their family when they told their family, and then when their family took them to the doctor, it bothered the doctor, and it bothered the psychiatrist, and it bothered so they then had their whole experience kind of an attempt to normalize them back into what is acceptable experience. And I think that if anything is going on right now, it's an absolute shattering of that deception, really, and that attempt to confine human experience to a tiny fraction of what reality actually is. And I'm not saying that I've experienced all of reality by any means, but what seems to have happened with me is for some reason, no reason of my making, I began to have extraordinary experiences that led into a deeper experience of reality, which I've been in now for 25 years.
Yeah, and we've covered that. Your journey up to this point, we've covered in the first couple of episodes. So just to reiterate, do go back, watch that, just to catch up to speed with where we are now. But we're going to continue with the journey.
Yeah, so where we left off last time was where I'd gone to Mexico.
Yes,
I went to Mexico, and I also then went to Egypt. And the only reason I went to Egypt was because I had a compulsion to see the Great Pyramid at Giza, which, if anybody hasn't experienced it, had the luck to go there, is more extraordinary and more monumental and more powerful and more incredible and more magical than you can possibly imagine. Just to say that. And again, both experiences were going to Mexico and going to Egypt. They were quite short, a couple of weeks each. And each time I went, I was, for some reason, taken out of the pain that I'd been experiencing consistently.
Yes.
And then when I got back from Egypt, I went back into pain. So I was still looking for a way out of this extraordinary pain. I mean, we're talking about mind-altering states of pain, really, that couldn't be helped with painkillers.
Sort of like delirious pain, that sort of pain.
I was delirious. I was delirious with pain. I was kind of outside of myself, I would say that. I started to have kind of, I don't know whether they would be altered, what you would describe them as, really. I would have sudden flashes of things. At one point, I saw something which I believed was my soul, and some of the first sculptures I made, because again, at this time I'd left my job attempting to become a sculptor and ended up really incapacitated. But I was able to begin to make sculptures in wood. And the sculptures that I made were different views, really, of this, what I perceived to be my soul, with a part missing. They were wooden sculptures, and each of them had a part that I blackened with a torch to make them charcoaled and black. And the sense that I had was that there was something wrong. That was the part that needed to be reinstated, reconnected somehow in order for me to heal. But again, I say that now with much more clarity and perception than I had of it at the time. At the time, it was just I saw something, I knew I needed to make it physical, so I turned it into a sculpture.
Well, tell
Yeah.
us a bit more about that. You said you saw your soul. What was that experience? What did you
Um,
see?
what did I see? Well, I saw what I sculpted. That's it, really. There isn't any
Right.
more. With a lot of this
Mm.
stuff, there isn't any words that you can really give to it. It's like a dream, but much clearer, much more vivid, and it stays with you. And you can almost kind of what's interesting about the experiences were that I could navigate within them. So even now, when if you remember a dream, you tend to remember the dream from the perspective that you saw it when you dreamt it. Whereas when I was having these experiences, um, when I think about them now, I can actually go into the space and I can move around in the space and I can
Right.
see what was in the space with me from different perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a form, but that form, when I saw it from different perspectives, took on different shapes. And that's what I began to sculpt.
Right.
So again, it's, going way back to the original experience that I had at university, which was this Groundhog Day,
Mm-hmm.
where I just kept waking up again and again into the same day. Something I think had begun to, all of these experiences were impacting on my consciousness. All of the confines, all of the clear delineations between waking and sleeping, the fact that the man came to my house from my dream, all of these clear delineations between what's real and what's the dream realm, what's real and what's a vision, what's real and what's a normal state of consciousness, and what's an affected
Elevated
state of
state.
consciousness.
Mm.
Sorry.
Elevated state of
Well,
consciousness.
yeah, or deeper, elevated or
Yeah.
deeper,
Yeah.
expanded. Yeah, I was being really. It was like I was being torn apart. My consciousness it began to be fractured by that experience at university of the Groundhog Day. And then these experiences of having the dream, and then the man coming to the house from the dream, and then having this intense pain, and going into these other states of consciousness, deeper levels of reality, which can't really be understood or expressed fully from this level of consciousness. I don't have the words. But it was different. These things are different. They feel different. You know that there's something different about them. Like I knew when I had the dream about the underlying mathematical pattern of reality, that there was something very different about it. It wasn't a normal dream. So again, I was being taken into other realms of consciousness, other realms of reality. And again, when we talk about it now, the perception, and that's the normal perception, would be that this is real. Here we are, me and you chatting. That's real.
Yeah.
We're awake. We're conscious. We haven't taken any substances. We're not in any kind of altered state of consciousness. I'm not in extreme pain. You're not in extreme pain. We're not delusional. And that all these other things that I'm describing to you are somehow lesser constructs being created from this reality, this firm reality. But my experience has been that that's not the case. That those other levels of reality are just as real as this one. They're not kind of lesser abstract aspects of this real life or real waking consciousness. They are equally valid, equally real, equally explorable. And what began to happen with me is they started to bleed into this waking reality, so that eventually now there's really very little delineation between any of those concepts. And in some spiritual traditions would say that is the true nature of reality, that the kind of mundane level of reality which the West has kind of forced us to believe is all there is, because of a fall in consciousness, a contraction of consciousness as part of a natural cycle that we're going through. And all that's happened is I've kind of broken free of that quite early on, but actually we're all going to start breaking free of that, so getting back to the story, this is where it's going to start to get tricky to if people are going to follow this purely with a logical, rational, linear perception. This is the point where they're going to start turning off and saying, oh, that doesn't make any sense, and looking for anomalies and things that don't fit in the story, because this is where I really started to go into what I call the spiritual paradox, and the paradox being where you can have two seemingly contradictory beliefs or experiences, but they're equally true. And that's kind of what I'm talking about, that I was beginning to go into a state whereby, as I've just explained, there was not one purely dominant real reality and little sparks off of it in the dream world or in these moments. That those realities began to take on a weight and a quality that was equally real, and but had different rules, where some of the rules that apply in this realm don't apply there. So you're actually having two completely seemingly contradictory and experiences that should cancel each other out but don't. So for example, normally you would be able to say with absolute certainty, I'm awake or I'm dreaming. To say I'm awake and I'm dreaming is a paradox. And that's really where we're beginning to go now with this experience.
Okay. Well,
I don't know if that makes any sense at all.
No, it makes sense. It makes sense. It does make sense at this point. And you're right. Some people have a very rational, logical brain, and well, let's just keep an open mind, because I mean,
yeah, exactly.
Until you've heard it, you haven't heard it, have you? So you never know. We're not going to assume people will poo-poo any of this. You're explaining things incredibly well. This is actually the purpose of these conversations, that we are taking it slowly through the story. Yeah. And I'm here acting, hopefully to a degree, as the viewers question master. That's not the right word, but you know what I mean. I'm trying to be here to ask the questions that may be going through your mind, as in, well, why did you think that, or why did that happen, or I don't understand this piece. And if there's pieces I don't understand, and there will be many, I'm going to interject and ask that question with the intention of it becoming clearer for more people to open their mind to this, as at least a possibility that there could be something in this. Yeah. Which there is, there is, but until you've heard it, you can't, you can't just take it as read. We all need to make sense of what we listen to. So that's what we're going to do, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that although we are, we have in the West this idea that we are a highly evolved consciousness. It's becoming increasingly clear that the evolution of consciousness and of civilizations themselves is not linear. We've had this idea that we've kind of started at this big bang and then just kind of evolved, and anything down here is kind of lesser. We've just got more and more intelligent and more conscious, and it's becoming clear that that's not what's happening. We're actually, expanding and contracting in cycles, and that
and anyone who anyone who looks at the pyramids has got to ask questions. I mean, it's,
Exactly. Yeah. And
you've got to look and go, how did they do that? When
well,
we can't even
exactly.
put up a block of flats these days.
Exactly. And actually, I do remember one of the things that was very interesting to me. We drove a long way to see the Great Pyramid, and I didn't even know if I could make the journey, but I, I did. It was quite an endurance test, to actually get there. And we had to go with a guide because there had actually just been some tourists. There'd been a tourist incident in a terrorism incident, and so you couldn't go anywhere alone. And we went with this young guide who had been trained and done his degree in archaeology at the University of Cairo. And when we got to the Great Pyramid, which, if you actually look at it, it's so immense you can't really imagine how big it is, and the size of the blocks are just monumentally huge, much greater than you'd think they need to be.
Like
And
houses.
yeah. And
Yeah.
when I actually asked him, and expecting, I asked him the question, how you've been recently trained at the University of Cairo, how do you think they move these massive blocks? Because of course, when I was at school, we had these drawings, illustrations of the pyramids being, these blocks being pulled by slaves and whatever, one on top of the other,
rolled on logs and all that
rolled
sort
on
of thing.
logs and pulled with Greek ropes and whatever. And assuming that he would say the same, give me the same answer. And actually what he said was, our current understanding is that they were most likely levitated into place.
Really?
Yeah. Now, I don't
Wow.
know. I don't know whether that was my reality, because this was before 2000. This would have been 1999, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So 24 years ago. I don't know, because I never spoke to anybody else at that time. But it is where the conversation is going. It is where the research is suggesting. It is, the science that we're recovering now, this ancient technology, which has been lost, which even in Tibet today, one of the last bastions of this ancient knowledge and ancient science, there are said to still be lamas today that can levitate objects with sound, and it's coming back. So yeah, I mean, it's just another part of the experience, really, that I think I was taken there. It wasn't a tourist event, a tourist trip. I went. It was extremely difficult to get there, and I think I went in order to hear that said.
What made it difficult to get there? Because it's right on the edge of Cairo, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I wasn't in Cairo. I was somewhere else. We had to fly somewhere else. We couldn't fly to Cairo.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, we were a few hours away.
Right. Cool.
The details of which I forget now why, but yeah, the whole purpose of the trip was just to see it. I never went inside it. I've never been inside. I didn't feel it was right to go inside, actually. And yeah, so I think it will. Anyway, we're digressing back into the last conversation, but yeah, for me, seeing that pyramid and hearing that one statement were really significant moments. Yeah. So anyway, so back at home now after Egypt, this state of pain that I was in really drove me inside. And that doesn't mean I wasn't meditating or anything. I didn't know anything about meditation. That was not part of my awareness at all. But I would just lie for hours, just allowing myself to kind of just see what was in my mind, see what was coming up. And because you can't leave the house, I could hardly leave my bed most of the time. And these extreme bouts of slightly altered consciousness because of the pain, I started to just question everything, everything that was around me, everything that was taken for granted. My brain just started to become really, really questioning of everything. It was running away all the time. It was questioning this, questioning that. Why do we do this? Why do we do that? And people talk about losing your mind. I think I was losing my mind. The pain was driving me out of my mind. And but in so doing, it was actually stimulating my mind to kind of question the constructs which create our reality. And the one which really I became fixated on was time. And I just started to see clocks as a ludicrous object. Every time I saw a clock, I would just think, what on earth is that? As if I'd just been dropped from, another planet. And I was just looking at everything for the first time, seeing things for the first time. And I was thinking, why do we teach children to tell the time so early? Why is it so important that they can tell the time? What is it? What is that clock doing? And it sounds as absurd now as it sounded back then to me.
And were you able to answer logically as well?
No, well, yeah. All that was happening was that you'd kind of dismiss the question as, well, it's telling the time. It's helping us to work out where we are and plan the day, and work out whether we're about to go to bed or we're about to have breakfast. It's kind of, but it became a bit of an adversary to me. I kind of felt like it was somehow confining me. I think when you spend an awful lot of time in bed, or an awful lot of time sick, it's like when you've got a cold and you're kind of getting over it and you really just want to get up, and every hour seems to pass really, really slowly. I think it was like it was creating a prison to me physically. It felt like I was trapped by time, quite literally, because I couldn't go anywhere and I couldn't do anything, and I was on my own a lot of the time. So again,
time had really slowed down for you.
Really, really slowed down. Really was dragging. And yet physically there was nothing I could do about it. I was kind of trapped in the house. So again, a kind of microcosm that time was trapping me somehow. I was aware of that, but I wasn't thinking about that in terms of consciousness at all, or on any spiritual level. And again, it's important for people to remember, this is pre-internet, books about consciousness and TV programs about consciousness on Netflix and whatever. None of that existed. I mean, literally, this was a wasteland in terms of consciousness back pre-2000. For me, there was nothing. I had no.
Yes. So looking at that around 2000, you're lying in this bed, but you like now we would be on our iPads or whatever, Google things or learn something, or say, I'm going to learn Italian, or do something. Whereas you literally were alone with your thoughts.
Yeah, really alone. And and so my mind started to, as I say, I talk about it now as if I was looking for a way out, and my mind was looking for a way out. And interestingly, it fixated on time. And so I'd already had this dream that had told me, I'd had clarity from this dream that I was being shown that there was a mathematical perfection, a pattern behind our reality, inherent in our reality, that was so vast, and that I was too close to see it. That inability to see that pattern and to know that it was there was creating my suffering. And again, I would say now that's a fractal of what's going on now. The fact that we don't understand that there is a pattern inherent in everything, that everything is actually pattern, which has mathematical perfection to it, which is now being understood, is the cause of our suffering. So again, this is one of the links of my journey with as a fractal of the collective journey, what we're realizing, what's causing our suffering, what's causing our pain, our distress. Yeah, so I started to look at the clock as an object, and at one point I just asked myself, the question arose to ask myself, explain to me how 1 million years ago is further away from me now than 1 minute ago. Something like that. And instantly I asked the question, and the question I said as well cannot be explained in terms of time. Don't use the terminology of time to explain that to me. That's off limits. Explain it some other way. How is it further away from me? And the moment I asked that question, I can remember I was sitting on the sofa, and I just felt this explosion and implosion in my head. It was like a literally, people talk about blowing my mind was literally blown. It massively, my sense was of massive expansion and then massive contraction.
Like a sort of sonic boom type of thing.
A sonic boom, yeah, like a, yeah. And
like a,
yeah. And then I was just sitting on the sofa, just laughing my head off. And I was just sitting there like a lunatic, just laughing and crying. And just, it was like, how could I possibly have imagined that time was passing? How could I possibly have imagined that I ever see that second hand move more than once? Everything else is memory. Everything else is information, retrospective information. Everything is actually just now. And it was like a huge sense of liberation. And like I'd been fooled by the biggest joke ever. Like there had been this huge joke played on me all my life, and I just got the joke. You know, it was like, how could I not have seen that?
So explain the joke. Explain the joke.
The joke is the idea that we're moving through time. That there, you know, and for me now, it's the idea that there was a day or a place called yesterday. You know, other than as a concept, that it actually existed. And I cannot explain it any deeper than that because it's experiential, and that's it. It's like you either can experience that or you can't, because I know up until that moment I was exactly where you are. It doesn't make any sense.
I'm trying,
but it is. You can't understand it. It's not something that's understandable, and that's why, you know, so many of these spiritual tenets they have to be experienced. Something at the right place, at the right time, in the right moment, there's a shift in consciousness. And that shift then encapsulates the previous awareness and the previous perception, but it expands it. And that's what that was. It was just a sudden step caused by pain, caused by suffering. It was like my mind gravitated towards this thing, this portal. Time became a portal that I was able to step through to the other side. And yeah, I mean, it was like, I actually describe that now as like a Zen koan. It's like a, you know, Zen koans are just statements which, you know, are designed to confound logic, to confound the brain. And what seems to happen is when the brain is completely confined, and for me, it was being constrained and confined on all sides, because there was nothing to distract it. There was nothing I could do. There was nowhere I could go. And everywhere I was, there was pain. So it's like, so how are we going to get out of this? How are we going to escape this? Well, we're not. We're just going to implode it and come out somewhere else. And that seems to be, you know, that was one of the first experiences, I suppose, that was in alignment with supposed spiritual truths. that linear time is an illusion. It didn't stop me talking about linear time because that's that's the paradox, that because linear time is something which is necessary in this realm of experience in order to navigate, make sense of, and function in this realm, that doesn't make it true. There are lots of things that we live by that are not necessarily true, or are only limited truths, and that there are expanded truths beyond that. And again, that's the nature of of a contracted consciousness, is that it can't perceive of any level of reality or any experience of consciousness outside of that. And the only way that you can really understand that is when, for some reason, there's a sudden expansion into that higher consciousness or that broader consciousness, and which then has that nugget of the original consciousness confined within it. So you can move between the two, but you don't really believe it. I don't believe that time is passing, but I can talk about tomorrow. I can talk about the past. And for a long time, that realization and what happened afterwards, many things happened afterwards, became a huge limitation to me telling this story. Because eventually, not only did I come to realize there was no time and therefore nothing ever happened, but there was no me that it ever happened to. So, eventually you get to this place of complete kind of self-paralysis where you're not able to, not able to have any history or any memory or any story at all.
So you know me well enough. I like to try to find analogies that make it simpler to understand.
Yeah.
Would it be then that time is like the stage that we are dipping in and out of? We're coming in and out of a forever constant present place.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it, actually. That another way is, if you think with all of these things, if you think of watching a film, say you grew up, say you were born watching a film, or watching a play, for example, better example. And then at some point, so you've been watching that play for like 30 odd years. And then suddenly, the backdrop falls down and you see all the, the production team and the lighting crew and whatever. And you suddenly go, hang on a minute.
There. That was never there.
But
it was.
That means that's not.
Ooh, tingles.
Yeah, but then you can actually go back to concentrating on the play because it's an interesting play, because you become addicted to the story, if you like, because you're involved and engaged in the story, because you have been since birth. But then you look and go, oh, well, actually, it's been constructed by all these people and all of these elements which I didn't know existed. And so you
like
then
seeing
see
all
the bigger.
So like seeing all the stagehands that come on in black and move the things around, and you don't see them at all,
yeah,
but they are there. And if you choose to go deeper and concentrate at another level, that's what you see.
Yeah, and that's what you then experience as well as a result of that.
Oh, yes.
All the world's a stage.
just
as Shakespeare said, all the world's a stage. It's
all
not.
The world's
it's
a stage.
It's not a description. It's a truth. It's an absolute truth. Yeah.
Yes, that's made it clearer than ever before. Yes, thank you. That's interesting. That's really good. Okay, so did your pain subside as a consequence of this experience?
It's hard to remember exactly how it happened. Yes, it must have done. It did, because I did actually start to become more active. I started going out more, and I started, becoming part of the community again. And but one thing that actually, the most important thing that in some ways that happened was my memory began to fade. I had been somebody who had fairly significant kind of flashbacks, primarily at all times, to just ordinary aspects of my childhood, nothing traumatic. But my past was really very present with me. It was one of the, I didn't dwell on it particularly, but it was very kind of omnipresent. And after that experience, that definitely began to fade. And I think that again was one of the first experiences of losing my, what in spiritual terms would be called the ego identity, the ego self. That was a really fundamental tipping point, really. And that's because linear time is foundational. It's the foundation on which we build our sense of self. So if you think about it, if you suddenly lost your entire memory, it would be you'd be much less certain about who you were. It's quite common that in certain situations or new situations, we refer back to kind of know ourselves, know how do I respond to this situation? What's my preference here? What's my, reaction here?
Yeah.
It's not spontaneous. It's based on who you remember yourself to have been and how you remember yourself to have responded in the past. So, for example, it's very common with food, around food. You'll go to a restaurant and it'll say, oh, it's lamb liver or something. Oh no, I don't like liver. I don't like liver. I don't like liver. And where you're actually going back to is a memory.
Yes.
That may have only happened once, but it's become ingrained as an aspect of you. I am somebody that does not eat liver because I do not like it. I am somebody that doesn't like skiing. I am somebody that prefers a particular type of music. And actually what we do is we begin to build all these little memories, build on each other and create kind of pathways to our sense of separate identity.
So limitations too.
They are limitations. They are limitations. They're this and not that. I like this. I don't like that. I prefer this to that. I don't do this. I do this. You are basically the sum of all of those choices and all of those experiences and all of those beliefs and all of those decisions that are all located somewhere along this linear path that you believe is your past. And now a couple of things happen when you suddenly collapse that line, or that line collapses itself. Who you have been kind of collapses with it.
Yeah.
And because I was already in a kind of altered state because of the pain and the isolation, I think that what actually began to happen is my true self, which is the self which is beyond, that exists in all of us, but is beyond that summary of preferences, the ego self, began to take a more prevalent role in my life.
Yes.
And I began to become less of who I had thought I was and more of this other. But it was a gradual process. It didn't happen very, very suddenly. But one thing that I did... Go on.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, it sounds like you were almost like a blank slate.
No, it wasn't that. It was at that point. It wasn't that extreme. I just stopped at that point. I'd say I mostly just stopped having memory. I still had the preferences, but I didn't have so much memory of my past. It was a beginning. It was a beginning. It was a beginning of the undoing of the egoic self. It took a few years of other things that occurred to really undo it.
Okay.
Fully. So no, I wasn't a blank slate, but I was different. I was not functioning purely from that personal identity as much as I had been before.
Right, got it.
But one thing that was really interesting was that I started. There was one day where I was doing. I don't know if anyone knows of this. There's a scheme called Let's in the UK, and it's basically where you trade your time with other people. So there's no money exchanged. They give you an hour to do something you need doing, and you give them an hour to do something they need doing. And so my way to kind of get back into the world was through joining this Let's scheme. And at one point, I'd agreed to go and mind a child for this woman who had to go and had an appointment for a couple of hours. And completely, fine afternoon. We had a fine afternoon, and then I didn't know this woman really very well. And she came back to the house. And so I was, she was saying goodbye to me at the door. And I was walking down the path and I got to the gate and I just stopped and I couldn't go any further. And I'm standing there and I'm thinking, well, this is embarrassing. I can't actually open the gate. I can't actually walk any further than this. And she's still standing on the doorstep, waving me off, thinking, why has she stopped at the gate? And I couldn't move. And what was going on was that part of me didn't believe that there was anything solid there to step onto.
Mm.
Because again, part of what is the purpose of memory and the belief in linear time is that also laid out along that pathway are all of the experiences that we've had and the things that we've been told about the physical nature of this reality. And it science is now coming round to the realization, after many, many years of the last couple of 100 years of searching for the building blocks of physical reality, what they've actually come to the conclusion of, which is the same as all the ancient spiritual texts told us, is there's nothing there. It's only your belief that creates the construction of physical reality. So having had this momentary implosion, explosion, realization, the part of me that had held the beliefs about how to navigate and continue to construct physical reality in order to be here in these 3 dimensions, had somehow been fractured by that experience. And so it was kind of saying, well, I'm going to keep you safe by don't take another step because there's nothing there. There's nothing there. And in fact, that's true. It wasn't an aberration. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a lie. I was telling myself. I was telling myself the deeper truth about the true nature of reality is that there is nothing there. But again, this was way before any of this was on social media, or we had social media, or scientists were realizing that. My consciousness had begun to step into a deeper truth about the nature of reality, which is there are no building blocks to physical reality. It's all an illusion. But because we have learned to function with that illusion, we can actually experience that illusion. But something about losing linear time had begun to break down for me that construct, and you'll find, supposedly, great spiritual masters and stories of, lamas in Tibet and, true spiritual masters who are so able to live within the deeper truth, the true nature of reality, that there is nothing there. They're actually able to pass through walls, to put their hand through the table, to manifest anything out of thin air, and still maintain their physical presence in this reality. I've certainly never gone anywhere near that level of experience, but that's the truth. I mean, I'm talking about this now, and I know that it's being recounted as a kind of aberration. But actually, it's not an aberration. It was the truth seeping through to my reality and into my experience. The true nature of this reality is that it is illusory. There is nothing there. And even science now confirms that. So that was the beginning of that kind of transformation.
So how did you get through the gate?
I had to literally have a conversation with myself. Again,
and think and think.
all of that the explanation that I've just given you is retrospective. I didn't have any of that awareness at the time,
No,
but there was certainly a part of me that said, "There's nothing there," you know. So it was coming from me.
you had to think it there, did you?
I had to
In
think it
effect,
there. I had
yeah.
to kind of quieten that part of my mind down and say, actually, no, this is ridiculous. Of course you can step forward. Of course you can step
Mm,
forward. And that experience happened again and again. It wasn't the only time that happened. That continued to happen, and sometimes still does. Uh, but yeah, so it was interesting how now I can look back and see how this was really a deconstruction of self, a deconstruction of the ego identity that began to happen through these experiences. And I when I write about this in the book, which I'm sure at one time in this millennia or the next will be published, if I ever get to the end of it. I say pain is my guru. Pain was my spiritual teacher. Pain
mm,
pushed me to places that no one would ever choose to go willingly. Our aversion to pain, our aversion to discomfort keeps most of us, very safe in our construct of reality, and it does tend to be these kind of extraordinary environments, extraordinary experiences, which push us to crack reality and to expand into something else, to the deeper reality that's beyond it. So yeah, that's the story of losing time.
well, that's the first big step, I think, into us, as in myself and viewers, maybe trying to grasp the story that you have that is wholly different to our own experience. I think the idea of this, the linear time, which is how we live, is can be so difficult to let go of. At this point, as we finish up this episode, this conversation, Freya, is there anything that you can suggest we do, or a sort of a little task we could try, or anything to experience anything with this, or is this not something we can actively delve into? It'll either happen to us or it won't. What's your take on that?
Well, I think one of the most important things that my journey has taught me is that everything that happened to me happened in spite of me. There was never a spiritual journey. I was never on a spiritual path. I was never looking for any of this. It just happened. And other people have explained that to me as being, it was the right time. You came here in this lifetime to have this experience, and it was going to happen. And there are, a myriad different personal aspects. Everyone has their own time, their own path, their own purpose. And actually, it is thought that the more you're seeking these experiences, the less likely you are to have them. And actually, I mean, I'm telling what I did, I told what I did, which was to ask myself. I used that koan. Why is a million years further away from me now than a minute ago? That's it. That was it. That was all I did. That was all there is. And either that will have an impact or it won't. And again, it's not it's nobody's job to wake anybody else up. It's not that we will get there when we're ready, and we are all being assisted. And if this is what we came here to experience, we'll experience it anyway. So yeah, it's not a psychological thing. When you're ready, you're ready.
Yes.
And until you're ready, it's not an experience you want to be having.
Yes. One of my favorite sayings is "Stop the struggle and let it unfold," which is
Yeah.
I do like that saying. So
Yeah.
to approach life with curiosity, openness, and some silence, possibly every now and then, to allow the voice to come through.
Yeah, and I think once you know, I mean, again, part of the reason for telling this story and telling my journey is once you know something's possible. We talked about in the first video, I think, where I talked about Roger Bannister,
Mm,
in the 4-minute mile. And before Roger Bannister ran the 4-minute mile, nobody believed it was possible.
mm,
And as soon as he did it, loads of other people suddenly
yeah,
were breaking the 4-minute mile. It wasn't that they all suddenly got fitter or stronger or faster.
yeah,
The psychological barrier to impossibility was
yeah,
shattered. And I think that a lot of this is about trying to say, okay, here we are in our normal reality. I'm just telling you about experiences that I've had which, inhabit a wider reality, and that is not, that construct there, that limitation there is not a true limitation. It's
absolutely.
it's a belief.
Absolutely. I mean, everything yet to be invented could be invented now, but hasn't been
Exactly.
yet.
Yeah, we have to be
Yes.
ready. We have to be ready. And I think there is
Yes.
something very, very fundamental, which we'll talk about, later, and maybe we've talked about it before, that is actually happening at this point in consciousness, at this point in time, which will mean that more people are breaking that boundary and
Yeah.
expanding into a greater experience of reality.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Freya, thank you very much yet again. We have another conversation in the bag.
Thanks, Izzy. That's brilliant.
And
Thank
we
you.
will continue on the journey.
Yeah, I'll see you next time. Thanks a
See you,
lot.
Freya. Bye bye.
Bye. Bye.